Welcome to today's episode of the Simply Financial Podcast. I'm your host, Christopher Calandra. My goal is to increase your financial IQ with today's episode, which is about the Atlanta Federal Reserve Bank's GDP Now number. I talked about this recently, this season number 9, episode number 7. The topic of that show was about the gross domestic product, or GDP, for 2023 and 2024 comparatively. At the end of that episode, I talked a little bit about the GDP Now number. And what I talked about was at the end of January, the expectation of GDP Now was a forecast for GDP growth of annualized 2.9% in the first quarter of 2025. What I pointed out was that number jumped in early February to 3.9%. And I pointed out a few things. Number one is that the GDP Now number can be very volatile. It's a forecast. It can change quickly. The 2.9 to 3.9 jump in a few days represent this. I also talked about how this was a demonstration of the optimism surrounding the new year, 2025, and the Trump administration's policy plans. There was a lot of optimism. So, where are we today? We've had an enormous change in GDP Now. At the end of February, the expectation was for negative 1.5% annualized growth in the first quarter. So follow me on this. At the end of January, it was 2.9% positive. Then it jumped up to 3.9% a few days later in early February. But given everything that's happened in February, the number went from plus 3.9 all the way down to a negative 1.5% growth forecast for the first quarter. And then in early March, on March 3rd, a few days before you are hearing this, if you're listening to it as we publish it and go live, it had gone to negative 2.8% in the forecast for the first quarter using the Atlanta Fed's GDP Now tool. So that's a big swing from plus almost 4 to almost negative 3. So this highlights the uneasiness that the markets are currently experiencing. Part of it is geopolitical. Part of it's what's happening in Washington, including President Trump's administration's multitude of changes and the fast pace of change. Almost every day there's significant news coming out of the White House. And I think it also shows the uneasiness the American public now has about everything that's going on, as well as how this might play out through the economy. Remember point number 1 from a little bit ago. The GDP Now tool is very volatile. I could look next week and the numbers could be completely different. I wanted to do this episode because not too long ago, just a few episodes ago, I talked about how good the numbers were, and that demonstrated optimism. It seems only fair now to do an episode to show how the worm has turned notably, with a current expectation as of this recording of negative 2.8% GDP growth. That would not be good for the country, obviously. That would begin to bring about public discourse regarding a potential recession. You'd hear a lot about that in the media, and it would not be good for the Trump administration and the optimism that he came into this year with. Again, things can turn around, but this is pretty noteworthy. I wanted to share it with you. I'm glad I did. I hope you found it valuable. I'll be back with you on the next episode of the Simply Financial Podcast very soon. In the meantime, subscribe to the show if you haven't done so already. I would really love it if you would do that. Thanks again.
The views expressed are not necessarily the opinion of Osaic Wealth, Inc., and should not be construed directly or indirectly as an offer to buy or sell any securities mentioned herein. Investing is subject to risks, including loss of principal invested. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. No strategy can assure a profit, nor protect against loss. Please note that individual situations can vary. Therefore, the information should be relied upon when coordinated with individual professional advice. Please note, the information being provided is strictly as a courtesy. When you link to any of the websites provided here, you are leaving this website. We make no representation as to the completeness or accuracy of information provided at these websites. Nor is the company liable for any direct or indirect technical or system issues or any consequences arising out of your access to or your use of third-party technologies, websites, information, and programs made available through this website. When you access one of these websites, you are leaving our website and assume total responsibility and risk for your use of the websites you are linking to. Securities and advisory services are offered through Osaic Wealth, Inc., member FINRA, SIPC. Insurance services offered through Elliott Wealth Management Services, LLC, not affiliated with Osaic Wealth, Inc.